Marcus called me on a Wednesday afternoon, 91 days after the worst phone call of his year. The one where his lender told him his refi was denied. The one where I walked him through his FICO score of 638 and ran the math on what it had cost him so far. That call was 3 months ago. This Wednesday call was different. The bank had approved a new application that morning. Not the refi he originally wanted, which would have saved him $400 a month. A smaller one, at a moderately better rate, that saves him a little over $100 a month. He kept saying, "I didn't think this was going to work." A 90-day finance transformation video on YouTube would usually end here. Triumphant music. Here's the secret. Hit subscribe. The truth is, Marcus didn't transform anything in 90 days. He still has credit card debt. The 6-month emergency fund he should eventually have is nowhere close. The person he was on day 1 is still mostly the person he is now. His net worth at day 91 was still negative if you counted his car loan. What Marcus did do in 90 days is start 3 feedback loops that hadn't been running before. The loops are the entire game. Every 90-day money plan video on the internet is either selling you motivation or selling you a budget app, and neither of those is what's actually broken in people's finances. What's broken in most people's finances is that there are 3 specific mechanical loops the system is supposed to have running in the background. When they're running, your money slowly improves whether you pay attention or not. When they're not running, you can earn $200,000 a year and still feel broke. Marcus didn't have any of them running on day 1. By day 90, all 3 were running. The refi approval was the first piece of evidence that they were working. I'm Tom. I'm going to walk you through the 3 loops, why they have to start in a specific order, what Marcus actually did during each one, and the trap that makes most 90-day plans collapse around week 4. This channel is real personal finance for normal people. If you want to get real wealth growth, hit subscribe. Most finance content sells the 90-day frame as a psychological trick. Urgency, dopamine, sprint mentality. That isn't how the math works. The real reason 90 days is the right window has nothing to do with motivation. It has to do with how long the actual systems involved take to register a result. Your credit utilization changes the score it reports in about 30 to 45 days, once a billing cycle has closed and your card issuer has reported the new balance to the bureaus. Spending habits take about 6 weeks of consistent change before your brain stops treating the new pattern as deprivation and starts treating it as normal. An investment account needs 1 full quarter to produce a statement showing actual compounding. 3 different real-world cycles, 3 different waiting periods, none of which can be hurried. 90 days is roughly the smallest window in which all 3 of them can complete their first cycle and show you they're working. That's why most short money sprints fail. People treat the 90 days as a willpower marathon. The system needs the time because the systems built into the world require the time. You don't need more discipline. You need the loop set up in the right order, then the patience to wait for them to spin up. The first loop is the one almost everybody skips because it feels too obvious to bother with, which is the cash flow loop. You can't fix a leak you can't see. Before Marcus could meaningfully attack his credit card debt or build any kind of buffer, he had to spend 30 days getting visibility on where his money was actually going. Not budgeting, not cutting, just looking. Here's how he did it. He downloaded his last 90 days of bank statements and credit card statements. Then he opened a basic spreadsheet with 3 columns: date, amount, category. The next Saturday morning was spent categorizing every transaction. That's it. No apps, no envelope systems, no Dave Ramsey worksheets. Just a clear-eyed look at 3 months of his own past behavior. When he was done, he had a printout, and I asked him to underline anything that surprised him. The list was 22 items long. He'd been paying $58 a month for 3 separate streaming services his daughter doesn't use anymore because she watches everything on her boyfriend's account. He'd been paying $19 a month for a gym he stopped going to in February. There was a $14 monthly charge from an app he'd installed during a free trial in 2023 and never canceled. His grocery and food delivery spending combined was $940 a month, and roughly $200 of that was Uber Eats and DoorDash he barely remembered ordering. 3 different convenience charges from his bank, totaling $42, that he had no idea were happening every month. The total of just the surprises was $333 a month. None of them were big enough to notice individually. Together, they were larger than his monthly minimum payment on his highest interest credit card. He'd been bleeding $4,000 a year for at least 2 years and didn't know it. This is the part the budgeting apps and the track everything for 30 days advice doesn't quite capture. The exercise isn't about discipline. It's about visibility. Most people aren't overspending on dramatic things. They're losing money to a long list of small, invisible drains that compound into real numbers when you actually look at them. The cash flow loop is the only thing that makes those drains visible. Without it, every other loop you try to start downstream has a permanent leak in it. Marcus canceled 11 of the 22 items the same Saturday afternoon. The rest he renegotiated or rolled into a single monthly review. He set up automatic minimum payments on all his debts, so a missed payment couldn't tank his credit further. He opened a high-yield savings account at a separate bank and set an automatic transfer of $330 a month, roughly equal to the leaks he'd just plugged. That redirected money was the foundation of every loop that came after. Without it, none of them would have had fuel. Loop 2, the credit loop. By day 30, the cash flow loop was producing about $330 a month of usable money that hadn't existed in his budget before. We had a choice: save it, invest it, or use it to attack his credit cards. The math said the cards. Marcus had $11,200 in credit card debt at a 24% APR, spread across 2 cards with a combined credit limit of $14,000. His credit utilization, the ratio of what he owed to what he was allowed to borrow, was 80%. For context, the credit scoring models reward utilization under 30% and reward it the most when it's under 10%. The 80% number was the single biggest reason his FICO sat at 638. It wasn't his payment history, which was actually clean. It was that every credit bureau looked at his cards and saw an 80% balance, which the scoring algorithm interprets as financial stress. Here's the leverage point most people miss. Of the 5 factors that go into a FICO score, the 2 biggest are payment history at 35% and amounts owed at 30%. Of those, credit utilization is the single thing you can move fastest. Payment history takes years to rebuild. Utilization changes the score it reports in 30 to 45 days, the moment your next billing cycle closes with a lower balance. It's the only major lever in the credit scoring system that responds to action in weeks instead of years. For days 31 through 60, Marcus did one thing. He routed the $330 a month from his cash flow loop, plus another $560 a month he scraped out of clothing, dining, and discretionary categories he chose to put on hold, into his higher interest card. Combined with his regular minimum payments, he was throwing roughly $1,200 a month at the card. By day 60, he'd paid down $2,400 of the $11,200 balance. His utilization dropped from 80% to 63%. When his next billing cycle is closed and reported the new balances, his FICO moved from 638 to 670. 32 points in 60 days. He didn't do anything fancy. He paid his bills on time, like he always had, and he reduced his utilization. The score moved because the algorithm was waiting for the new number to come in. Nothing else changed about him as a borrower. He didn't earn more, didn't acquire any new credit, didn't open new accounts. The number on the report just reflected what was actually happening, instead of what had been frozen there from his worst financial year. And he still had room to run. The scoring models really start rewarding him when utilization drops under 30%, which his current trajectory will reach in another 5 months. This is where most 90-day finance plans throw in a misleading line about how you have to be patient with credit. It takes years. For payment history, that's true. For utilization, it's flat wrong. Utilization is the fast lane. If you have credit card balances anywhere above 30% of your limits, paying them down toward 10% is the single highest return move you can make in a 90-day window, full stop. It moves more dollars in your direction faster than any other lever available to a working adult. By day 60, Marcus had observable proof that the system was working. The cash flow loop kept producing money. His credit loop was now translating that money into a higher score. With both of those in motion, the third loop could finally start running. Loop 3, the compounding loop. It was the easiest one mechanically and the hardest one psychologically. Marcus opened a Roth IRA on his phone the morning of day 61. The 2026 contribution limit is $7,500 for someone under 50, but Marcus wasn't going to hit that limit this year. He started with $100, just $100. He set up an automatic monthly contribution of $200, scheduled to pull from his checking account the day after his paycheck landed. That was it. The whole setup took 14 minutes. The reason I had him do this in the third loop, not the first, is mechanical. When your credit cards are charging 24% interest and your investments are earning 7%, every dollar that goes into investments instead of debt is a dollar that's losing you 17%. The math is brutally clear in one direction. Investing before paying down high-interest debt is the most common mistake I see in 90-day plans, including in finance content from people who should know better. The credit loop has to be running first because every dollar you free up earns more by going into the cards than into the market. Once the utilization is under 30% and the highest rate cards are paid down enough that the bleeding slows, then the math flips and the compounding loop earns its place in your money flow. But here's why I had him open the account even before the cards were fully paid off. The Roth IRA has a 5-year clock that starts on January 1st of the year of your first contribution, not the day of the deposit. Open your account in November, and the clock effectively started 10 months earlier. If Marcus had waited until the cards were gone, which is realistically 14 to 18 more months, he'd have lost an entire year of clock time that runs in the background for the rest of his life. The $100 he put in on day 61 wasn't there to grow into anything. It was there to start the clock. The actual contributions would scale up later, once the cards were gone and the freed cash flow could move there. That's the version of compounding nobody puts in a 90-day video. The first $100 isn't doing financial work. It's doing structural work. It's converting Marcus from someone who hasn't started investing into someone who has. That identity flip matters because the next 10 years of his decisions will be made by the new version of himself, not the previous one. The dollar amount on day 61 is irrelevant. What matters is that there is an account with his name on it with a contribution that already happened. By day 90, Marcus had $300 in his Roth, $7,800 remaining on his cards, a credit score of 678, and a high-yield savings account with about $1,000 in it. Numbers that look unimpressive on a finance influencer's screenshot. Numbers that, if you understand what the loops are actually doing, look like a person whose financial life is structurally different from where he was on day 1. The reason most 90-day money plans collapse around week 4 is that they tell you to do all 3 loops at the same time. Track every transaction, build a 1-month emergency fund, attack your debt, start investing, negotiate a raise, all running simultaneously, beginning the first Monday. It sounds aggressive and motivating. In practice, it's a recipe for burning out by week 3. The loops have to be sequenced because each one supplies the fuel for the next one. Cash flow produces the dollars that the credit loop attacks the cards with. The credit loop then frees up the high-rate dollars that the compounding loop can redirect into investments. You can't skip ahead. If you try to invest before you've stopped the leaks, you're investing while bleeding, which produces no net forward motion. If you try to attack debt before you've found the leaks, you're throwing dollars at a balance while new charges keep replacing them. The order is locked. Visibility first, then leverage, then growth. Marcus's 90 days worked because each loop got a full month as its primary focus, even though the previous loops kept running in the background. By the end of week 4, the cash flow loop was on autopilot. Week 8 delivered the credit loop's first FICO report. 12 weeks in, the Roth IRA had received its first round of automatic contributions. 3 loops, 3 results, 3 pieces of evidence that the system was real. Most people who fail at 90-day plans fail because they treat the whole thing as a willpower problem. They white-knuckle through 6 weeks of denying themselves everything and then break. The loops are the opposite of white-knuckling. Once each one is set up, it requires almost no daily discipline. The discipline got front-loaded into the setup. The maintenance is roughly 10 minutes a week. Back to that Wednesday phone call. The bank approved Marcus for a refi at 7.0%. His old rate was 7.4%. On his $400,000 mortgage, the payment dropped by about $110 a month. Over the next 12 months, that's $1,300 of breathing room he didn't have on day 1. Across the 30-year life of the loan, if he doesn't refi again, that's close to $40,000 of interest he won't pay. He could have gotten a bigger savings if he'd waited another 6 months to push his score above 720 and qualified for the top mortgage tier. We talked about that on the phone. He decided to take the smaller refi now and use the freed up $110 a month to accelerate paying off the last $7,800 of credit card debt. Once that's gone, probably around day 280, he'll redirect that combined money into his Roth IRA. The loops keep stacking. The refi was the visible result. It wasn't the actual transformation. The actual transformation happened on day 14, when Marcus first looked at 3 months of statements and saw what was leaking. Everything after that was inevitable. Once you can see the leaks, you start plugging them. Plugging them gives you dollars to attack the debt. Attacking the debt moves the credit. The score moves, the rates drop, the refi happens, the compounding starts. None of it required willpower. It required the loops being set up in the right order and 90 days of patience while they spun up. This is the version of personal finance most of YouTube won't sell you because it doesn't have a hook. Track your statements, plug the leaks, pay down the highest utilization. Open the long-term account even with $100. Wait. The work is unglamorous. Your first 30 days feel like nothing happens. The middle stretch feels like you're moving sideways. By the last 30 days, the system produces the first piece of real evidence that the math works. If you're starting this from where Marcus was, with debt and a low score and no buffer, the order I just walked through is the order. Cash flow loop first, credit loop second, compounding loop third. If you're starting from a stable position with no high interest debt and some savings, the order changes slightly. The cash flow loop still goes first because visibility is always the foundation. Then you skip directly to the compounding loop and put serious dollars into investing because there's no high interest debt to attack. The credit loop becomes a maintenance check rather than a primary effort. Same 3 loops, different sequencing depending on where you start. What the 90 days promises isn't that you'll be rich at the end. It's that you'll have observable evidence that the systems work. That's worth more than any specific dollar figure. Because the next 90 days and the 90 after that run themselves on the same loops. The proof carries forward. The motivation problem solves itself once you've seen the system move. Tell me in the comments which loop is the one you've never gotten running. I'll read every one. I'll see you in the next video.